Everyone believed they knew the truth about Joni Lamb, but after years of silence, her own nephew has finally come forward to share what actually happened behind the scenes. His words are shocking the internet, leaving fans stunned and critics scratching their heads. What did he say that has everyone doubting everything they thought they knew about Joni Lamb? Stay tuned because this changes everything. Rebecca Lamb had reached her breaking point after months of observing her family's public image. For years, the Lamb family had been viewed as a Christian family that stood together and upheld the principles they taught in Daystar. However, as 2025 went on, Rebecca realized that this image was rapidly eroding and that she could no longer remain silent. It wasn't just about her mother's new relationship with Doug Weiss, though that played a significant role. It was also about the message that Marcus Lamb's death in 2021 had left the world. It was a time when the family's faith and unity had meant something to people, but now only a few years later, Rebecca felt like they were throwing that trust away. The abrupt pace of Joni's new relationship and the way it was presented publicly made Rebecca uncomfortable. There was a huge hole in their family and the ministry, and people all over the world had grieved with them. Daystar viewers had prayed for the family, sent letters, and shared stories about how Marcus had changed their lives. Every time she saw a post online of Joni and Doug together, smiling at an event or discussing their future, she felt a knot in her stomach because it seemed like they were ignoring the grief they had told viewers was important to process. Rebecca knew that people were watching and that they were questioning everything the family had once stood for. Initially, she spoke to Joni in the hopes that they could figure out a way to manage the family's public image carefully with respect for Marcus's legacy and the people who had stood by them for years, but those talks didn't go well. Joni was offended and defensive because she thought Rebecca's worries were being criticized instead of cared for. The discussions devolved into arguments, and Rebecca was excluded from decisions. Her voice was ignored, but she couldn't help but feel that the family's reputation was slowly at jeopardy. She began to notice the comments on Daystar's social media, seeing how people were perplexed, hurt, and even furious, and longtime viewers were asking questions that the Rebecca couldn't ignore. The growing wave of disappointment when her family refused to respond, and supporters withdrew, claiming they didn't recognize the family they had followed for years. She knew that remaining silent would only make matters worse, so she made the decision to speak up, even if it meant getting herself into more trouble. She wanted everyone to know that she still cared about the principles her family had instilled in Daystar, and that she wasn't going to act as though nothing was wrong. When it wasn't, Rebecca wanted viewers to see that someone in the family was still standing up for honesty and integrity, even if it caused discomfort, because she felt that being honest, even when it was difficult, was better than pretending everything was perfect. While the family's reputation crumbled, some people supported her in speaking out. Rebecca's decision to speak up wasn't about embarrassing her mother or destroying the family. Rather, it was about defending the family's mission and reminding everyone of why they started Daystar in the first place. Rebecca Lamb never imagined the day would come when her own mother felt like a stranger, because Joni Lamb was more than just her mother growing up. She was her mentor, her comfort, and her example of faith. Although some accused her of inciting drama, Rebecca didn't regret it because she knew it was necessary to protect the family's legacy, even if it meant facing criticism. Deep down, she hoped her mother would see that this wasn't about fighting, but about saving what they had built together, for the viewers who still looked to Daystar for faith, hope, and truth. They worked side by side at Daystar for years, creating a ministry that was not only a family business, but a mission they firmly believed in. Rebecca felt that they would face any challenges head-on, united in their faith and love for their family. However, everything changed after Marcus Lamb passed away in 2021. The family was devastated by the loss, and everyone was grieving deeply. Rebecca watched her mother attempt to remain strong by hosting shows and continuing to appear at Daystar, but she could. When Joni started dating Dr. Doug Weiss just months after Marcus's death, she shocked everyone. At first, Rebecca tried to be supportive, telling herself that perhaps Doug was just a friend helping her mother deal with the loneliness. But as their relationship became public, Rebecca's worries increased. Rebecca had assumed that they would go through the grieving process together, holding on to each other and taking time to honor Marcus's memory before moving forward with anything new. Rebecca was still having trouble accepting that her father was actually dead, so she tried to talk to her mother privately, choosing quiet times to share her worries. She told Joni, "Mom, people are going to question this. It's too soon." She explained that Daystar viewers were still mourning Marcus, and that it appeared Joni was moving on too quickly, endangering the respect and trust they had worked so hard to earn. Over the years, Rebecca felt her mother was pushing her away, failing to see the harm this brief relationship could cause. Rebecca didn't want to control her mother's life. She just wanted her to slow down and consider the wider picture, but Joni didn't want to hear it. Every time Rebecca tried to bring it up, Joni would end the conversation by saying, "Rebecca, I need to live my life, or you don't understand what I'm going through." How Joni began making decisions without consulting Rebecca or even asking her opinion before family decisions were discussed together was what hurt Rebecca the most. Joni frequently sought Rebecca's opinion on ministry projects and family matters, but now that she was making decisions with Doug's influence, Rebecca felt excluded from decisions that affected their ministry and their family. It was as though her mother no longer trusted her or cared about what she thought. The words hurt, and for the first time, Rebecca realized that the trust she once had was gone when she tried to speak to Joni again during a family gathering. She was emotional, her voice shaking, and she said, "Mom, I'm begging you to think about this. You're risking everything. Dad built everything we've worked for." Joni's response was cold, her face hard. "Rebecca, I am done discussing this. I'm moving forward and you need to accept it." Rebecca left that conversation feeling alone, as if she had lost her place in her mother's life and in the ministry they had established together. She began to doubt her role in Daystar, her relationship with her mother, and whether she could continue to support something that no longer felt like the family mission it once was. She also observed how Joni's attention had shifted more toward Doug and their future together, leaving Rebecca to deal with the increasing backlash from supporters who were doubting the family's decisions. The loss of trust between Rebecca and Joni was not just about a new relationship, it was about the intimacy they had previously shared. Rebecca felt deceived that her mother would not listen to her, and Joni seemed unconcerned with the issues she brought up or the possible harm to Marcus' legacy. She felt as though she was yelling into space in an attempt to preserve what they had created, while Joni was resolved to move on no matter what the repercussions of Rebecca's suffering became. However, the silence between her and Joni grew heavier every day. She stopped attending meetings, withdrew from Daystar projects, and avoided family get-togethers where Doug would be present because she didn't want to argue anymore. Their family, not just the ministry, was shattered. Joni, on the other hand, seemed to convince herself that Rebecca was just being dramatic or rebellious, failing to see that her daughter was attempting to protect the family. Joni surrounded herself with people who supported her newfound distance. Rebecca felt abandoned not only by Joni but also by the family she once knew, and the breakdown of trust between mother and daughter ultimately became a symbol of the deeper issues in the Lamb family. The chapter further isolated Rebecca and created a barrier that felt impossible to break. Rebecca spent many nights questioning whether she had done the right thing by speaking up. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembering the look on her mother's face and the harsh words that ended their discussions. Rebecca's heartbreak was not just about losing her mother to a new relationship, it was also about losing the sense of unity, mission, and shared purpose that had once defined their family. She was left standing alone, hoping that one day Joni would look back and realize that change and the haste to move on could tear apart even the closest relationships. It was a painful lesson that sometimes, even when you speak out with love, people may not want to hear the truth. She grew up in a home full of faith, purpose, and a sense of mission. Daystar was more than just a network. It was the center of the Lamb family, something they all poured their lives into together. Rebecca Lamb never imagined that one day she would feel like an outsider in her own family. Her daughter was only attempting to protect the family and the ministry they had built with Marcus, and that trust once broken is not easy to rebuild. At first, Rebecca tried to remain strong for everyone, helping her mother deal with the loss while managing her own grief. She continued working at Daystar, attending meetings and broadcasts in an effort to keep things going during the most trying time in their lives. But as time went on, especially after Marcus Lamb's death, everything began to change. Rebecca's sense of stability began to crumble as Joni's relationship with Dr. Doug Weiss became public, and she began to worry about what Rebecca tried to voice her concerns about how quickly her mother was moving forward and how it would appear to the viewers and partners who still saw Marcus's legacy as a guiding light for Daystar. She thought that if she spoke honestly, her mother would listen, but Joni was not receptive to hearing anything that might challenge her decisions. Rebecca received cold responses and was told that she didn't understand what Joni was going through. Each conversation ended in tension, and Rebecca's words seemed to bounce off the walls Joni had built around herself. The more Rebecca tried to speak, the more Joni distanced herself. Meetings at Daystar that had previously involved Rebecca's input began to take place without her input. Decisions were made, plans were announced, and Rebecca learned about them when everyone else did. She went from being a key player in the family's ministry to feeling like a shadow standing on the sidelines. The worst part for Rebecca wasn't just being left out of the decision-making process, it was the loneliness that took hold of her body. Rebecca felt like she was bearing the burden of seeing the truth alone while everyone else chose to look away for the sake of peace. She started to withdraw from family events, preferring to stay at home rather than deal with the discomfort of pretending everything was fine at Daystar. Conversations with her mother became strained and brief, and even her siblings, who had previously looked to her as a voice of reason in the family, started to avoid talking about the tension, not wanting to take sides or risk Joni's disapproval. In order to avoid the cameras that used to feel like home to her, Rebecca began turning down invitations to appear on broadcasts. Her coworkers noticed her absence and whispered behind closed doors, wondering why Rebecca, who had always been so involved, was suddenly so quiet every day. Rebecca battled the conflict inside of her, missing her mother and the bond they shared, as well as the sense of working together with a common goal. She longed to regain her mother's trust so she could participate in the decisions that shaped the ministry she loved, but every effort to close the gap only made it worse. Rebecca's loneliness was not only emotional, it was also spiritual. The ministry, which had once felt like a safe haven, started to feel burdened by the weight of unsaid tension. As she would walk through the Daystar hallways, she could feel the staff members' confusion over the changes in leadership and the family dynamics that were beginning to affect the workplace. The energy that had once inspired her now felt exhausting, and the purpose that had once inspired her felt while lost in the din of arguments and secrets. Rebecca's silence grew louder as Joni and Doug's relationship progressed. She found herself crying in private, praying for clarity, and asking God to give her wisdom on how to deal with the growing distance between her and her mother. She journaled her thoughts, expressing her pain and frustration as she tried to process the hurt of feeling replaced not only in her mother's life, but also in the ministry that was meant to be their shared calling. Rebecca also noticed that her absence was being used. The narrative changed, making Rebecca feel even more alone, as if no one cared to understand the true reason behind her silence. Despite the isolation, Rebecca clung to her faith, praying for her family because she believed that God could mend what was broken, even when it seemed impossible. She hoped that one day Joni would see that her concerns were valid. Some members of the family and the ministry started to whisper against her, saying that she was being difficult or uncooperative. Rebecca's growing isolation taught her valuable lessons about family ministry and the cost of standing up for what she believes is right. She discovered that sometimes loving someone means telling them the truth, even if it pushes them away. She also discovered that being true to her values may require stepping back from the things she loves most in order to maintain her peace and integrity. As the days turned into months, Rebecca's silence became a silent act of strength. Even though she strongly disagreed with her mother's decisions, she refrained from publicly criticizing her because she didn't want to further polarize the community or harm those who still supported Daystar's mission. Instead, she continued to serve in small ways, showing up when it mattered most, even if it was in the background. Deep down, Rebecca still had faith that God could heal the pain and mend her relationship with her mother, and she hoped that one day they would find their way back to one another, not only as mother and daughter, but also as partners in the ministry they had established with Marcus's memory and faith at its core. Until that day, Rebecca's distance and silence served as a means of self-defense while she clung to hope, anticipating the day when her mother would reach out, prepared to mend the broken trust and mend the wounds that had caused so much suffering. In 2025, the Lamb family's legacy feels like it's hanging by a thread for decades. Daystar wasn't just a Christian network, it was a symbol of hope, faith, and family unity. Marcus Lamb's vision had transformed it into a place where millions of people tuned in to find spiritual guidance, healing, and encouragement. It was a ministry founded on sacrifice, late nights, shared dreams, and the conviction that they were called to something greater than themselves. However, now that Marcus passed away in 2021, everyone at Daystar, from the staff to the viewers, felt the loss deeply and felt that they were honoring Marcus's. As 2025 approached, it became clear that no one could ignore Joni Lamb's relationship with Dr. Doug Weiss. This shook the family and the Daystar community, and viewers who had previously viewed the Lambs as a model of Christian family values began to wonder what was going on behind the scenes. Some were supportive, stating that Joni deserved happiness after Marcus, while others felt deceived, believing that things were moving too quickly and not in the right direction. In keeping with the principles the family had upheld for years, the tension within the family was even more intense. Rebecca, the youngest daughter, felt that the family was drifting apart and that her mother's choices were jeopardizing Marcus's legacy and the family's reputation. She attempted to speak with Joni in the hopes that they could figure out how to handle this new phase while preserving the ministry's mission, but their discussions frequently ended in tears, frustration, and silence. Jonathan, Marcus and Joni's son, also felt the weight of the changes. He had always thought he would continue his father's mission, but as Joni and Doug began making more decisions, Jonathan felt ignored. It was painful and confusing for him to watch the ministry that was meant to be his future gradually change into something he hardly recognized. The Daystar offices, which had once been full of a sense of shared purpose, now felt heavy with uncertainty and whispers. Staff members who had worked with the family for years noticed the changes. Social media was flooded with questions about why the family was acting differently and why Joni seemed so eager to move forward. Rumors began to circulate about disagreements within the family regarding financial matters and whether the ministry was still in line with its original purpose. Meetings were different, decisions were made quickly and frequently without the input of people who had once been trusted voices in the room. The strain of trying to keep the ministry running while dealing with family conflict started to wear on everyone. Joni felt the pressure of keeping everything together while also wanting to move forward in her personal life. Rebecca struggled with the heartbreak of feeling unheard, and Jonathan battled the fear of losing the family legacy he felt responsible to protect what made it possible. Longtime supporters who had donated consistently started to withdraw, unsure if they could continue to support something that felt so unstable. There were days when Rebecca would walk through the halls of Daystar and see the pictures of her father on the walls, remembering the early days when they built it all with hope and sacrifice. It was painful to see those memories clouded by conflict and decisions she didn't agree with. 2025. But the reality was that the ministry was still operating successfully on the outside, still broadcasting to millions, still hosting live prayer calls, and sharing messages of faith. Presented new challenges as well. The world was changing, and viewers' expectations were rising as well. They were looking for ministries to be transparent and authentic, and rumors about the internal struggles of the Lamb family were beginning to surface. Every social media post and on-air appearance was scrutinized by people searching for any indications of flaws in the flawless facade Daystar had maintained for so long. Joni attempted to project strength by continuing to host shows and appear in public with Doug, but occasionally the strain was evident. Jonathan remained involved but frequently felt as though he was walking on eggshells, trying not to upset the delicate balance while still fighting for the ministry's mission. The legacy Marcus left behind felt threatened not only by outside criticism, but also by the very family that was supposed to protect it. Each family member had a different idea of what it meant to honor his memory for Joni. In the meantime, she decided to take a step back, realizing that her silence might be the only way to protect her own peace while the family worked through the chaos. As 2025 went on, it became evident that the Lamb family was at a crossroads. The decisions they made now would determine whether Daystar would remain a beacon of faith or become another ministry that collapsed under the weight of its own internal struggles. For Rebecca, it meant moving forward and carrying on the mission with new strength. For Jonathan, it meant finding his voice in a ministry that was changing faster than he could keep up with. And for Jonathan, it meant sticking to the values that had built Daystar, even if it meant having difficult conversations. This legacy was more than just a network or a ministry. It was a family's life work built with faith and sacrifice. And in 2025, it was in danger of teetering between what it had been and what it could become, depending on whether the Lamb family could find a way. Viewers could sense it, staff members could feel it, and the family could see it every time they looked into each other's eyes and saw the hurt, hope, and fear of what the future might hold. Must mend the rifts, rebuild confidence, and respect the mission they already agreed upon. Collective